Good evening, everyone. I'm David Moore, the CFO for the school district, and it's my pleasure this evening to introduce our superintendent, Dr. Sue Smith, who will start us off with a welcome. Dr. Sue.
Thank you so much, David. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to what this evening will be our last gathering together, looking at our strategic investments. And I want, as always, to welcome all of you who are joining this and also indicate a special welcome to the TTSD Board of Directors, Board Chair Maureen Wolf, Board Chair, Vice Chair Ben Bowman, Directors Karen Emerson, Sharon Fox, and Jill Zerschmead, as well as the members of our Board Budget Committee, Jimmy Brown, Octavio Gonzalez, Megan Madeline, Kristen Miles, and Corey Morgan. And thank you for your continued service in this role. As we've shared from the very beginning, this year is while it is not like any other year, given the effects of the pandemic, our commitment to continuing our reaching out to the community and seeking community input, providing information and seeking input is critical to us. It is part of who we are. And so this evening, to set the frame, you as a group will be asked now, after you have patiently listened in a Zoom format that is less than friendly and conducive to conversation, we will ask you to help us make some decisions and give your input relative to SIA investments and priorities, as well as the general fund priorities. And you will have two to evaluate this evening. This will not be the only time that we will ask you to do that. We'll allow you time today to start thinking about your first thoughts and provide feedback, but we'll leave a window open for you between now and time to be determined in the near future to give it some deeper thought and make sure that we have all of your input regarding the priorities, as well as opportunities to ask any other questions that you might have about how those priorities work. Additionally, we also have other resources of dollars that you will hear a light touch about this evening, and we are still working to understand the guidance from the feds regarding the elementary secondary schools emergency relief funds, or known as ESSER 2 and 3. Regardless of whether it is federal dollars, whether they are state dollars, or whether they are local dollars, our process remains the same, which is we apply the equity lens to all of those sources and all of those priorities. And so what I would ask you this evening, as you are considering giving us input around the general fund investments, as well as the SIA investments, are our equity lens questions. Number one, are the requests or the recommendations that we are making aligned with the district's mission and vision? Who does this decision or this prioritization affect, both positively and negatively? Is the priority being made ignore or worsen existing disparities or produce other unintended consequences? Are those being affected by the decision included in the process? What other possibilities could have been explored and should we explore? And is the prioritization and the investment a decision, an outcome that we can sustain over time? So with that, again, I welcome you all. I look forward to a good evening's worth of work. And I certainly look forward next year to being able to sit with all of you knee to knee after a short meal when we can again be together in community. And with that, David, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sue, for that welcome. Patty, if you can go to the next slide, please. And I think we had somebody that offered to link the slide deck into the chat, so you can look for that momentarily for your reference. There it is right there. Thank you, Director Kinch. So to summarize our time together tonight, or our goals during our time together tonight, we're going to share an additional tool that we use as part of our Smarter School spending process. And it's something we started in early 2020, pre-pandemic, and we've got knocked off the rails a couple times to complete the work in a timely fashion, but we keep plugging away at it. And that's our program inventory process. And we'll share how the district uses this process to evaluate programs and make program decisions. And then in turn, how we allocate resources from that process. And then Dr. Sue mentioned looking at the different resources that are coming from the state and federal government. We'll give an update on our general fund resource, our primary resource in the general fund, the state school fund, and then the SIA, and high-level overview of the ESSER dollars, the federal dollars. And then again, as Dr. Sue mentioned, we want to give you that yet another opportunity to give second thoughts on how these resources might be allocated going into next year and beyond. So with that, let's go to the next slide and we'll begin our program inventory part of the presentation. And next slide after that, Patty, please. So I'm going to start off by giving an overview of the program inventory process and then turn it over to directors Robson and Kinch to add some of the pieces to how we're applying this work in Tigard-Tualatin. This slide, I think most of you have seen before, but I like to use it to re-anchor our philosophy of aligning our resources with our priorities. And it's a perfect summary of what can happen when you do a process like program inventory effectively, because there's going to be some decisions that come out of that process depending on the programs about perhaps increasing investments for particular initiatives or programs, perhaps finding resource that you're currently spending that's could be ineffective, and it makes sense to repurpose or reallocate those resources. And then also communicating the work and some of the outcomes with stakeholder groups like this one. And then probably most importantly, this work involves hard decisions and multi-year planning. Just to reground everyone, at the core of our Smart School spending program involves a revolving cycle of implementing program, monitoring programs, evaluating and making shifts periodically to make sure resources are aligned appropriately with our priorities. Next slide, please, Patty. So what's involved with a program inventory is just what it is implying with the terminology. We're listing out all of the academic programs that we do in specific areas under the direction of our cabinet directors. And really at the focus is the student. And so we're asking our questions of ourselves: which programs are driving student achievement, for instance? Which programs can be expanded to serve more students, perhaps? Which programs, like I mentioned before, may be ineffective use of funds because they're not producing student outcomes? And then which programs are working for some student segments and not for others? The elements of a program inventory get to this piece about how students are being impacted, in that we identify the cost, we identify how results are being measured, and of course, the student populations that are being served with the program. And then also how the program aligns with our district priorities. Next slide, please. I believe this is where I turn it over to Director Robson, and he's going to talk about how we measure cost and impact for programs.
Yeah, thank you, David. Appreciate that. Good to see everybody. Yeah, I want to take us through in looking at our process around budgeting and programming, and looking at impact and cost. Doing a deeper dive into our programming. I want to give you an example of when we say program. This is an example of a program, for example, that it falls in the umbrella of mental health, culture, and climate. So when we say that as a program in our district, there are components, there are pieces of or components of this overarching program, for example, that are listed here that we want to do a deeper dive into in terms of impact and costs that make up the program. For example, positive behavior intervention supports, PBIS, as listed there, including counseling programs, behavior and SEL, social emotional learning interventions, that fall under the tier 2, tier 3 umbrella. Those are components of this program, if you will. Elementary social emotional learning, the PACS good behavior game, care coordination, mental health therapists, drug and alcohol counselors. So the example here is that there is there's impact and cost associated with all of these components that make up our mental health, culture, climate programming in TTSD. So next slide, please. So the process is then when we look at impact and we analyze the impact, in smaller teams, we have come together and continue to do so in our process to look at each one of these components. And we pull out the measures of success. How are we measuring impact, and what those measurements are telling us in terms of data. So we look at that more intently, obviously as a whole, and then to those individual components. And then we also have included, after looking at data and doing analysis around that, around impact for the particular student groups it's impacting, we look at the principal survey results, and we had surveyed our principals around all the different components of the programming that we have in our schools. And specific to our mental health, culture, and climate, we have principal survey results that we use as well. Then what we get to, if you pop back to that slide for just a moment, one of the things that we're doing as well is we're looking at, thank you very much. We're looking at the strengths, the weaknesses or gaps, and potential program changes or needs that come through these deeper conversations. And with that, we get an impact rubric score. And so if you go to the next slide, what we wanted to share with you is that rubric score around impact is based on these criteria here, and you can take a look there, but it ranges from the scoring of a 1 around impact after doing a deeper dive into each of those components, around clear evidence that it's ineffective through data analysis, it's unclear in terms of the evidence, don't have enough yet, to a 3 that's promising evidence, and then a 4, which is really clear evidence that the program is effective. So we come away with a rubric score around that impact that is a part of our deeper conversation. Next slide, please. And then in terms of cost analysis, very similar, that we pull out the ongoing non-personnel costs associated with each of the particular components within that program, and the ongoing personnel and time costs as well. So you've got these costs associated with it, and then you've got a total cost then in terms of the non-personnel costs and the time costs. And then with that, then we also know how many students we're impacting and how in terms of the program component. And then the per pupil spending then can be calculated from that. And then based on that conversation and digging into that information, we have a cost rubric score. Next slide, please. And the cost rubric scores are indicated here that we use in terms of overall inexpensive for the district and inexpensive on a per pupil basis, to moving through kind of the process where it shows inexpensive per pupil, but slightly a larger district investment, to a large investment on the district's part, but kind of a medium per pupil investment, to a large district investment with a large per pupil investment. So as individually we come to these rubric scores, then that conversation goes deeper as a collective to wrap around each of these components. Okay, next slide, please. And then so you take the impact, what we're doing is we're taking the impact score and we're taking the cost scores and we're comparing those and coming to a place of discussion and agreement around those two factors. And then we really start to go deeper into, as a collective, the program next steps for each component. That's kind of the base that you see here on the slide, the program next steps for each of those components that I listed under the mental health, culture, and climate. And that really draws out, what do we feel like, what do we think needs to really be happening for us in terms of either tweaking a component as a part of the program, strengthening it, shying away from a certain aspect of it, but that's where we start to hone in on our budgeting that is specific to smarter school spending and being good stewards with the dollars that we have, that in terms of knowing very specifically through time costs, through personnel costs, through impact, what direction we need to go. What comes with that then is a next step, which is putting our program components, each of those, into a quadrant. And I'm going to turn it over to Director Kinch, who is going to actually take us through an exercise here and give us some information on that next step, which is the quadrant exercise. Director Kinch.
Next slide. Good evening, everybody. I'm Director Kinch. I'm in the Director of Student Services. So that includes special education and our climate and culture programs. And I have the pleasure to share with you our SEL program and give you an opportunity to practice doing a program inventory yourself. So there are three things that I'm going to accomplish in the next 45 minutes. One is we are going to do a simulation of program inventory with the elementary SEL program. The second is I will share with you the results of our department program inventory for some of the programs that Director Robson just named. And then finally, we're going to have two specific proposals that we would like to get your feedback on tonight that I'll share with you at the end of this section. Next slide. So you're going to be asked to rate the impact of this program and the cost and put it on a quadrant. So before you do that, I need to share with you a little bit about this program and the outcomes that we have. So we're calling it the Elementary Social Emotional Learning Program. There are two main strategies that we are looking at within this program. One is the PACS Good Behavior Game. The PACS Good Behavior Game is a program that promotes community building, emotional regulation, integrates social emotional skills throughout the day. It's not a curriculum and doesn't happen at a specific time of day. It's a way teachers build their classroom where kids are taking ownership of their community, they're reinforcing each other, and they are learning how to manage themselves and support each other. Teachers are trained in PACS and then they implement the structures throughout the school day. And we have coaches that come in and work with alongside teachers to implement it. The second piece that our coaches support teachers in is SEL lessons. And when we say SEL lessons, they're very specific to some core competencies around social awareness, self-awareness, self-management, relationship building, and responsible decision-making. These are explicit lessons that teachers implement during the morning meeting time and then reinforce throughout the day with their students. And again, the SEL coaches create these lessons and share them with the teachers. Next slide. So there's extensive research on both SEL and PACS, national and international research that shows the preventative measures, that the preventative, this prevents later special education referrals, suicide prevention programs, drug and alcohol use. And I'm not going to share all that with you tonight, but I'm happy to share that with you if you're interested. What I'm going to share with you tonight is our local data. So the first part is teacher perception data. Through the PACS program, we've been working with Washington County, and several other districts use PACS. So we work together on program evaluation. And one really important part of our program evaluation is, what do the teachers think? So teachers who use PACS say they enjoy teaching more. They feel less stressed. They have fewer office referrals. You can see here that in Washington County districts, 71% said it made their job easier, and that 62% said their students were more engaged. Next slide. And just to be clear, this is 18-19 data because that was the last full year that we had without COVID interruption. So this is our local data from our teachers. So you can see we have it slightly higher than the average of 76% of our teachers said they felt less stressed. 67 said their students were more engaged. I feel more support at work thanks to PACS, 67%, have more time for instruction, 59%, and PACS made my job easier, 56%. Next slide. One of the other ways that we measure outcomes is by counting spleens. That's a PACS word, and that means off-task behavior. So in the fall, our SEL coaches go into classrooms and they do a count of off-task behaviors, and then they go back into that same classroom in the spring. And what they're looking for is a reduction in spleens if we're successful. And what they were able to do was correlate the number of coaching sessions a teacher engaged in to the percent of reduction. So what this slide is telling you is the more coaching sessions you have, the less off-task behavior you have in the classroom. Next slide. Some other data to consider as you're going to discuss tonight whether this program is effective is our principals said 100% said this program is important. 60% said it could use some improvements. Data from last year, we were able to get this data before we closed down for COVID. Every February now, we are doing a 2-week count of how many students are being removed from the classroom because of behavior. And we saw between 18-19 and 19-20, a 47% reduction in the removal of students from class. And that is the first time we had K-5 implementation of PACS program. Next slide. When we talk about our culture and climate, actually when Tigard-Tualatin talks about any of our programs, we often talk about the triangle. And so I wanted to just take a minute to explain what we mean when we talk about tiers of support or the triangle. We think our systems are healthy, we believe, when at least 80% of our students are benefiting from the program. So in my world, we often look at discipline referrals. So when 80% of our students are getting less than one discipline referral, the culture and climate of our school is doing pretty great. We do always expect that there's going to be some students at sometimes who will need some extra support. So we expect 5 to 15% needing some extra support. And then we always expect to know that we are always going to have a small group of students who will need more intensive support. Next slide. So I want to give you a little bit more additional data as you decide if this program has an impact. Most of our schools have 90% are in the green zone, which is very high. But when you look a little closer at our subpopulations, we do have disproportionate discipline data for our Black students in Tier 2. And we have disproportionate discipline data for Black students and students with disabilities in Tier 3. Next slide. So in a couple minutes, you're going to be asked to go into breakout sessions. And I just want to keep you thinking about the data that you just saw. You can refer back to the presentation, but thinking about what are the strengths of the program. It's really important, as Dr. Sue started this conversation, of who is this program working for, and where are the gaps? Next slide. And then you're going to compare this to the cost of the program. So when we talk about cost for this program, we have 3 SEL coaches that serve all of our 10 elementary schools and K-5 teachers. We also are looking at the time it takes for staff to participate in their coaching sessions, the training time, and any kind of materials. So when we put all those costs together, the total is $127 per elementary student, because this program serves all students. You can see a total cost of $698,500. And when you start thinking, is that a lot of money or a little bit of money? Just as a comparison, you can see when you take our overall gut budget and you divide it by the number of students we have in the district, it's approximately $13,000 per student. Next slide. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. You will have the host of Todd, Sarah, or Susan, who can help remember the questions I'm asking you. But we're going to ask you to do a little inventory of this program. And is it effective on a scale of 1 to 4? And what are the associated costs? Are they high or are they low? So you'll have 10 minutes to do this breakout session and have a discussion related to what you've heard today. Again, you are practicing. We are not making decisions. This is not going to be set in stone. We just want you to get a feel of what it is like to do a program inventory. Are there any questions about the task?
Carol, so on the first 10-minute session, we're just, the groups are just focused on cost? Or are we?
We're doing both.
Both cost and
We're answering
impact?
both questions. What is the what evidence of impact does this program have on a scale of 1 to 4? And what is the associated cost in 1 to 4? So when we come back, we will be able to chart it onto our matrix. Maureen?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. I have a quick cost clarification, and I apologize if I'm the only one who missed it. In the slide, you referenced 127 per elementary student, and then I think you referenced 13. You referenced a much larger number, and so could you restate what that was? Because I don't think it was on the slide.
Yeah, it's way at the bottom. The font got off, but yeah, we were thinking that if you were like us, most of us were like, is 127 a lot or a little? And so we were trying to give you a comparison. And so David says that when we take our overall budget and we divide it by the number of students we have in the district, we spend $13,000 per student.
Okay.
And that's a general fund, based on the general fund budget.
Yeah.
In the current year, 157,000 or million.
Yeah, okay, no, that makes total sense. I thought it was in relation to the program itself, and that's what threw me. So, okay, thank you so much, Carol.
Yeah. And we know, I mean, we do know that this will be a little challenging because you have limited information and limited time. We just want you to get a feel of what it's like to think about the program and have an opportunity to have the discussions that we were able to have when we talk about whether a program's effective or not.
And just a reminder that if you would prefer to have this conversation in Spanish, you can stay in the main room. And you can opt out to the room that you're assigned to if you want to stay in the main room for the opportunity to speak in Spanish related to the task. Ready to open up the doors?
Okay, we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Do we have anybody who? Nope.
Patty, do you mind changing the slide to the we're in breakout groups?
Do we have one built in? I don't,
Yeah, I think so.
okay.
It's
let me-
2 more slides down.
Okay.
I just left that in there for Todd and Susan to have.
Whoops, there it is.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Carol, do you want to go to any of the other rooms or are you okay here?
Yeah, I can go to another room. How do I go to another room?
I'll just put you in a room.
Okay.
You're actually in a room. You just got to go to breakout rooms at the bottom and click the room that is assigned to you.
Hey, Zin, I don't have that option.
Okay. You can just relax then for a little bit.
No, I'll just hang out. I'm like, I don't know how to get there. I did have an option. Oh, no. I see all the rooms.
Oh, because you are a co-host. So you actually have to click on the breakout group and then click on the rooms and then join your room that is room 2.
Okay, so what do I do? I'm in breakout rooms in progress. What? Say that one more time.
So if you go into the button, if you click on the button breakout room, and then you'll probably see the whole list because you're a co-host. You just click on room to join. There's a blue sign there.
Oh,
And it's
yeah, there we go. It just popped
Yeah.
up. I see
There
it
you
over at the
Okay.
9.
Hey, Patty. I accidentally came back to the main room and I didn't mean to. I'm in breakout room 2.
I think you can always go back and hit breakout room and join again.
I wonder, I just don't know where it is. I'm such a
Oh.
goof.
Everybody's going to be pulled back in 20 seconds. I think you should just enjoy some
Okay.
of what you're eating right
It
now.
said the breakout room's going to close in 58 seconds and I hit go back. It's like, oh shit. It's
I
tired.
couldn't find the unmute button. Sorry, I wasn't ignoring you, Leslie.
Oh, that's fine. Are we all back?
We are. I'm not sure we got a lovely warning. So we are back, and we got through, at least in my group, we got through the impact rubric, and we were just getting into the cost.
Okay, well, that's great. We are going to monitor and adjust and have a little fun with this because I jumped into group 2 and they probably could have used another 10 minutes as well. So Todd, do you want to, did your group get through it?
Yeah, you know what? We did, but didn't. We didn't get to a rubric score, to be honest with you. We ran back through the data from the slides to give folks a better connection coming off of hearing it initially. And, but we had some really good questions that really are part of this process that came up.
Yeah.
And it really gave the flavor of teams who are doing this work. It is about digging deeper and pushing the kinds of questions that this group that I was in really started to ask. And so that I wanted to acknowledge that, even though we didn't.
Can you share a couple of those things?
I can, yeah. Part of this was Chris had shared, makes me think about the desired outcomes as it pertains to different populations of students, as we were hearing, the support specific to like PACS, for example, and then hearing the data that we had, disproportionate data for some of our Black students, led to that question of, really understanding what are the desired outcomes for each subset of student, and are the strategies really hitting the mark that way?
Great.
Which is a absolutely spot on kind of question to ask as a part of this process.
Yeah.
Especially as we think about budgeting and supporting further in some way, shape, or form that particular resource. How do you have subgroups? How do you have a subset of one group, basically along that same lines, who are not, who are not getting basically the benefit of those strategies and that based on the data that we had seen? So that same kind of question, we see that's working for 90%, but not for some of our students. So that theme resonated with our group, and also then made group members think about other groups of students, beyond what the data was saying for our Black students, and the 90% that were adjusting well to it, but our ELs, our TWE students, that conversation would have been started as a part of this process too. So.
Susan, do you want to add anything?
Very similar conversation. I think some of it was context. So is 67% good or bad? Dr. Sue was with us and shared some similar data with the TEL survey, which is a different survey, and that we'd taken somewhere around mid-60s and above is positive, which is hard. It's good to know what the gauge is. It would also be good to know what some of the feedback is for other programs, not just this one. So, but overall felt like it was the impact was good and high, and then we were getting into a little bit of context around what constitutes off-task behavior and putting a cultural lens on that.
Great. And I was in a group, and we were just noticing how many more questions you end up having.
Right.
So you want to know, why did some teachers think this, and why did others think that, and what do students think? So what I'm going to suggest we do, since we don't have a score, but I want to give everybody else an opportunity. If you were to rate from 1 to 4 of impact, and I know some groups got there and some didn't, what would you rate it? And if you want to say what questions would you have or why, please put that into the chat and see where we're at.
Carol, do we want to share the rubric on the screen by chance?
Yeah, I have it coming up. We can go to the next slide, Patty. So Caitlin has a 3. This is just impact, not cost. And again, we're not going to hold you to this. We're just having a little fun. 3.5, 4. 3.7. I mean, it's always fun to do a quiz or see how it compares to what somebody else came up with. Okay, and then the cost, I know many of you didn't get to, but $127 per pupil, 600, almost between 600,000 and 700,000. If you are interested and want to put your rating in for that, is that low cost or high cost? And again, we will not hold you to it. And that's a 1 to 4, 1 being 4, what, oh gosh, I don't want to do it wrong. Which
Carol,
one's the low cost? Which one's the high cost?
I put it in the chat so folks could take a look at that too. This is the cost one that's in the chat.
So low cost is 1?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Here. Okay. So it looks between 3 and 4 and between 1 and 2. Jill has a 1.135. That's nice and precise. You got to be precise when we're talking about money. Okay, well, let me share with you about our conversation and with our business department and our consultants and some of the team members from my department. So next slide. So SEL coaches are also called EBS and Title I coaches because, of course, in education, we like to name things, lots of things. So I am so sorry about that. But SEL coaches seem to be the thing that people understand the most. So we rated it as high impact and probably a 2 on the associated cost. It is intentionally not at the very top for the reasons that you described. If it doesn't reach all of our students, how could we ever say it's perfect? It's not. But it did affirm that the practices that we are putting in place are having an impact. What we would want to consider is expanding these types of programs to our middle and high school. And we already do have restorative justice SEL trauma-informed coordinators at both middle and high school. And while we're going at it a little bit differently, it's the same concept of social emotional skills, community building, relationship building. Continue to partner with our building equity coordinators and our equity and inclusion department to really talk about identity and social justice standards within those SEL programs and lessons. We want to include families, and we're just starting to do that. And then somebody said it, the team recommended having some intentional focus on our TWE programs. So that's where we landed. And then I'm going to share with you a couple other conversations that we had about other programs in my department. Next slide. So one, we always look at our PBIS programs, and I wish I had 2 hours to share with you what all these programs do and what they mean. You guys were having a great conversation about what does the data mean and what are the implications of that. And please call me if you have questions, because I'd be happy to talk about it. But one of the programs that we look at is, are we doing the right things for kids? And when we integrate our mental health services within our school environment, in our classrooms, in our schools, we have better outcomes. And so one of the SIA recommendations from last year was to hire elementary deans and associate principals, because at the elementary level, it's the principal and our counselor, and they are the main support for the whole school. What that means for our counselors is that they are pulled from counseling and mental health type activities to support the daily, everyday running of the school, and not able to always do the mental health support that we would like them to be doing. So that was a recommendation from the SIA committee, and this just affirms that we would like to continue on that path to build in those integrated supports. Next slide. Another area that you'll see in the SIA recommendation was adding middle school counselors. You can see we rated that a little bit lower. We have more disproportionality at our middle schools and high schools with our Pacific Islander, our Latinx groups. And so our supports are not meeting everybody's needs. And so the recommendation to add 3 middle school counselors to our middle school program, so they all have 3, but for 1 for each school, affirms that recommendation also. Next slide. And then here's one that was a really interesting conversation. We've been talking a lot about mental health this year. We have mental health therapists through LifeWorks, and we also have mental health therapists through Youth Contact and drug and alcohol counselors. And then we also have the school-based health center that is not reflected on this matrix. We also have care coordinators, and they are a referral service. So students are referred to the care coordinators who get them access to services outside of our school. What we found when we did this was it's not that they are not effective programs. So I want to make that really clear. We didn't have clear data about the outcomes. It's partly because every contract had a different measurement. These are services that are not really integrated into our school in the way that we would like. And so we had a great conversation about what do we want from these programs. And the recommendation is that we need to align and integrate these services into our schools, into our counseling programs, into our classrooms. And so we need to do more work with our stakeholders and service providers to figure out how to do that. And so we are going to have a recommendation around that. Next slide. So this is where I'm going to share with you our 2 proposals from my department. You will get to share your feedback later in our presentation tonight, but I want to be clear about those 2 proposals. The first one is in our SIA application, we had put that we wanted 1 social worker, and that's at the top of our priority list. We did not hire a social worker this year, partly because of COVID and because we have mental health therapists and care coordinators that were playing those roles. And as I just described, there's some work to do around integrating those positions and those people into our school systems. But after that work, we are making a recommendation that we shift that hiring of 1 social worker to investing into health and wellness coordinator. And the high leverage moves that person would do for us is working with those contracts, those LifeWorks, and those people who provide those services and integrating them more into our school systems through our counseling programs. They'd also work with our equity and inclusion department and make sure that the services that we are offering are culturally and community responsive. And then we want to put a more intentional focus on our suicide prevention and responses. So this person would work and co-host our counseling group. And finally, that when we come back next year, there will be clearly defined outcomes that we can evaluate the effectiveness of the services that we provide. Next slide. The second question we're going to ask you is our elementary dean and associate principals that were in the SIA application. When we got into COVID, we had to prioritize which positions we wanted to hire first. And so the elementary deans and associate principals during this year of COVID were in priority 4. Next year, we will be able to fund all the first 3 priorities. And we would like to move the elementary deans and associate principals up on that priority list because we believe that we will, again, that when we integrate our mental health services into our schools and they're there every day and all the time with our counselors, that we are serving students better. So that would allow our counselors to provide more focus on mental health and wellness. They would be able to partner with our SEL coaches and build those skills with students, and they'd have more time to collaborate with our family parent advocates and strengthen family partnerships. Next slide. So that ends this portion. We'll come back to this at the end. Thank you for your time and practicing with me tonight.
Thank you, Director Kinch. I appreciate seeing those real life examples of program inventory at work. And hopefully all of you were able to learn more about our internal workings when it comes to actually applying some of the best practices when it comes to smarter school spending. I'm going to transition into our financial update. And Patty, if you can go to the next slide, please. So these numbers might look pretty intimidating. I'm going to try to simplify this for explanation purposes, but I wanted to give an update. There's been different financial information that's come down from the state level since we met at our first meeting in February, and we shared our initial financial update. But on March 1st, the legislature released their first draft of the proposed budget, and that includes the state school fund. And so the number that was included for the state school fund is 9.1 billion statewide. And to give you some context, our current 2-year budget for the state school fund is 9.0 billion. So only $100 million increase, which is causing some heartache in the K-12 community statewide, because as you can imagine, it's not a sufficient number for Tigard-Tualatin and most, if not all, districts across the state. But my attempt is to, in a simple fashion, show the impact on Tigard-Tualatin based on taking what we're currently doing as far as staffing and programs in our current year, and moving that forward to next year to determine what's our current service level budget. In other words, how much is it costing us to do this year in 21-22? And then on the revenue side, we apply those dollars we would be expected to get over the next 2 years with a $9.1 billion allocation. So you can see that, perhaps you can see this, but the revenue is about $9 million short next year when you compare that to our current service level expenditures. And going forward, that gap even grows to $9.6 million in 22-23. And the other goal here is to show what the impact is on our fund balance and use of reserves over 2 years if we did nothing else. To take you back to the Great Recession in 08-09, the Tigard-Tualatin School District handled any shortfall during that time frame 2 ways. There was reductions of staffing, and there was also use of reserves. And the board has a policy to maintain reserves at 12% of our current operating revenue. So the number in the top portion on the left-hand side, 151 million, if we applied 12% at that level of revenue, our reserve policy requires us to have $18.2 million at the end of 21-22. And then we've also been reserving dollars to open up Art Ruckin Elementary. The capital construction and building of Art Ruckin will be through the bond, but to open the building and operate it with the principal's office, counselors, utilities, any types of supplies, anything to keep the building running on a day-to-day basis. We need to include money in the budget to get that kick-started. So our number for that estimate is between 1.8 and $2 million. So we're saying at this level, we would have a projected ending fund balance at the end of next year, in June of 2022 of 22 million. Our required reserves are 20 million based on those two elements I just mentioned. And so we have an overage there of about 2.1 million. But going forward, with this funding level and expenditure level, we continue eating away at the reserves, and we would have 12.5 million at the end of the second year of the biennium, 22-23, and our required reserves would be 20.8 million. So we have a shortfall of 8.2 million. I'm going to transition to the right. It's the and share that right now our plan is to build our budget on a $9.3 billion level, and there's a couple reasons for that. The advocates, our lobbyists, and our K-12 advocates at the state level don't want to give the legislature any ideas that or any indications that 9.1 is nearly adequate for K-12 funding in the state. So we know our lobbyists and advocates are going to keep plugging away and try to get additional dollars allocated for K-12 the next 2 years. The number that we're settled on right now is 9.3 billion. We're going to build our budget on that. And to give you an idea, for every 100 million in state school fund change at the state level, that means $1 million to Tigard-Tualatin. So you can see, moving left to right, with a $9.3 billion allocation, our deficit reduced by $2 million, from 9 million to 7 million in 21-22. And then with based on an estimated beginning fund balance of 31 million, we would expect to have 24 million at the end of 21-22. And comparing that to our required reserves or our targeted reserves of 20 million, we'd have a overage of 3.8. And then going forward to the second year, going through the same exercise based on an increase in revenue. They always split the revenue typically from between a 49% allocation in the first year and then the rest, the 51% in the second year. That's why you see the revenue amount going up from 135 to 140 for the state school fund. But all in all, in the end, after 2 years under this scenario, we would end up with a shortfall meeting our targeted reserve level of almost $4.5 million. I'm going to pause there for a second as we transition to the next slide. I'm also showing this in the next slide in chart format based on the 9.3, but I'll pause for a second to see if there's any questions so far. So my goal here with the chart is to show, a bar graph to start out comparing revenues and expenditures in each year based on a $9.3 billion state school fund. Of course, you see the larger, the taller bar for expenditures, because our 9.3 is still an inadequate revenue level in both years. And then I've also showed a couple trend lines, one for the ending fund balance, that's the green line. So that's having that excess of about 3.8 million over our targeted or required reserves in year one. And then the green line, of course, falls below the yellow line in year two, meaning we have about $4 million or $4.8 million less than our targeted reserves. Jill asked a question. Let me bring that up again. What percentage of the total state budget is education getting in the $9.1 million budget? And how does that relate to last year's biennial percentage? That's a great question, Jill. I looked at that recently based on the budget that was released back on March 1st. And if I remember right, it was in the 33% range. If you look at just general fund and lottery dollars, which has been the historical resource for K-12, that's the legislature has gone away from that in recent years, especially with using part of the SIA funds or the SSA funds to help balance the state school fund. If you include the portion that they're using from SSA for the state school fund, it's closer to 36%. But there's been recent years where the state school fund has been 38 to 39% of the general fund and lottery funds. So that's a disturbing trend for K-12, but there's been shifts to other programs in recent years in the state budget for sure. Corey, I didn't catch your question. What is the mechanism to dip deeper into reserves? Great question too. Yes, during the recession, as we were drawing below that targeted level of 12%, we would go to the board each year before adopting the budget and get their approval to dip below the 12% level. And we had to do that, I think, for probably 3 years straight, at least. And then we were slowly able to come out of the revenue shortfall, not only at the state level, but the school district level, and get to a point where we're back to building a positive level reserves for the next rainy day. Next slide, please, Patty. So I want to make sure there's no more questions on the general fund before I move forward with the other dollars that we wanted to talk about tonight as far as updates. For the student investment account, we do have an update since that February meeting. I think the number we shared at that meeting for 21-22 estimate for the student investment account was $7.5 million. We have an updated number here of 8.1 million. From what I understand, these estimates will be finalized in May sometime, but right now the number we're using is 8.1 million. And I wanted to also point out some of the common themes that you'll find in the SIA activities budget. We included that as a pre-read document. We have an updated document for your reference to use as you're doing your feedback exercise later on before we conclude the meeting. Next slide, please, Patty. So also a quick review of the ESSER dollars, or Elementary Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund. We received the ESSER $1, the lowest dollar amount, earlier this year. And we used those dollars on our online curriculum and internet support and some of our expenses related to reopening, including PPE and cleaning supplies and equipment. Recently, we received the Sr2 allocation. So those were the dollars that were part of the stimulus package at the end of 2020, the federal stimulus package. And those dollars can be used in the same fashion as ESSER 1, plus they added a few broad categories, including transition and recovery, mental health services, and ventilation systems. And then most recently, the American Recovery Plan, the Biden plan, allocated a significant amount of money to K-12. Our current estimate, we haven't received our actual allocation, but we're being told it's 2.25 times the ESSER 2 number. So we're using 12.8 million right now for conversation purposes. And we're not I wanted to clarify too, we're not bringing forth any request for feedback or any recommendations for use of these dollars. We're starting those conversations internally, what that might look like, especially with this level of dollars. And then this is going to be a multi-year process because the ESSER II dollars can be expended through September of 2023, and the ESSER III dollars can be expended through September 2024. So 2 to 3 years, we have these dollars to expend. Next slide, please. So this is a list of the ESSER III uses, and you might notice that some of the guidance from the federal government is much more specific related to the use of these dollars. And like I said, I'm not going to read through this. I'll keep it up there for a minute or so you can get a flavor, but it's everything from safely reopening schools to addressing mental health needs, after school programs, addressing the impact of lost instructional time, and addressing the disproportionate impact on some of our marginalized population of students. Maybe go to the next slide. I think the rest of them are on there. Providing integrated student supports. You'll see the summer learning and enrichment programs. Now, I don't have a slide on it, but the district is also going to realize approximately $4 million this summer through the dollars allocated by state leadership, including the governor, and legislative leadership to apply to summer programs and childcare programs. And a use for the ESSER dollars could be the required 25% matching that's required on those state dollars. So that's another example of use of the ESSER dollars. Any question on ESSER or any of the other resources?
So David, just to clarify real quickly on that 25% match, so that means we have up to $4 million if we match it. Is that what I understand, 25%?
It'd be $4 million plus another $1 million. So
yes. Okay.
$5 million is a lot of money to spend. The timeline right now, I think, is through September 30th. So there's hope that perhaps dollars can be carried forward, or maybe there's another round of dollars being allocated for the summer of 2022.
And do they care where that money comes from? Does it have to be ESSER dollars, or is that what they're assuming it's going to come?
No, it can be any type of,
okay.
It could be a general fund resource.
Okay.
It could be another federal fund resource, such as ESSER.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Or even a state resource, SIA dollars, perhaps, depending on how you're using them. Okay, let's move on, please, Patty. So we're going to share, reshare some of the budget proposals, not only you heard earlier this evening, and some of those you heard on April 7th. So let's go to the next slide and give you a chance to give further recommendations. As Dr. Sue said earlier, there's going to be opportunities to continue giving us feedback yet again tonight, plus after we're completed with our process here this evening. And basically, I took the students' proposal and just replicated their slides here from April 7th. So just to go review the ask from the student group. They're asking for $300,000 combined from the general fund and student investment account to help eliminate the $225 pay-to-play fee. And this would apply, their request would apply to all TTS students. to alleviate that pressure and those barriers for families for access and opportunity for participation in extracurricular. Next slide, please. Second part of the proposal was, I think you have to hit it once more, Patty. Second part of the proposal is their transportation ask. So we have a lot of students that can't participate in extracurricular because they don't have transportation. Some activities might start later in the evening, not necessarily right after school. So the ask was $100,000 from the general fund. And this was strategic because since it's transportation between home and school, we get the opportunity to attain 70% reimbursement through the state school fund for those costs. That's the way transportation costs for home to school work. Every $10 we pay for transportation, we get $7 back from the state in our state school fund revenue. And this would provide buses at both high schools, Monday through Friday, for all high school students. Next slide. Third part of their ask is $100,000 from the student investment account for a special fund for clubs and performing arts on a grant application basis. And this will help offset some of the fundraising that student athletes and students are asked to do. The hope would be that it would help diversify programs to give kids more opportunities and remove some of those barriers. Any follow-up questions on this ask?
Corey has his hand raised.
Corey.
Yeah, so is this a 1-year ask or a 2-year ask? My first question.
Yeah, I think the intention is this would be ongoing. It would be, we would build it into the budget and it would become part of our current service level that we talked about, especially in the general fund and the SIA funds that are ongoing.
Okay, and these dollars are for just 1 year, so we would double this for a biennium?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
And then does this also consider capturing like work or whatever it would take to capture metrics pre and post to evaluate the effectiveness of it after a year or two?
Yeah, and that's a great point. Somebody else mentioned that today. I don't remember who it was. We've had a lot of conversation about this, and yeah, anything that we're supporting as a strategic investment, we want to consider those student impacts and outcomes for long-term. I mentioned earlier, implementation, first year, monitoring on an ongoing basis, and then evaluation in year 2, 3. So it's like anything else that we're talking about when it comes to programming and keeping tabs on it to make sure we're getting the best bang for our buck. Octavio.
So I know that we're just talking numbers right now, but I'm sure there is going to be the implementation and the underwriting of this if this goes through. I'm very much interested in, okay, let's just say it goes through. This is an example. I'm interested to know what other activities that the students will have to kind of honor this program. I want volunteer service. I want something from the students to kind of give back into this program other than just receiving these programs paid for. So I know that we're still going to go through the underwriting process and how it gets implemented, but the fundraising part of it maybe is not part of this qualifying, but I think it's important that the students still continue to learn that aspect and that role, or maybe they volunteer. I mean, I'm interested in the underwriting part of this other than passing this through without knowing the other components. So I want to know more about this and where are we at with those kinds of questions.
Yeah, and we've had some initial conversations about how we systemize this, but we know that's going to be a necessary step. We just haven't taken the next steps on what that might look like, and also, for you'll see later in a future slide, I broke it down, and I don't want people to get too focused on the numbers and the resource, but like for the $300,000 ask for pay to play, I just broke it down. 2/3 is the general fund, 1/3 would be dedicated towards our marginalized populations in SIA. So we've been talking about how do we determine who might have access to what pot of money, and are we gonna, the ask right now is all kids. Is that the right outcome, or should we focus on those kids that have the barriers of access and opportunity for extracurricular and activities? So yeah, I think you're onto something there, Octavio, about what's the skin in the game for and what's the process look like for access. I saw another hand. Did Jill have a hand up earlier?
I did, but my question was very similar to Octavio's, and so I don't want to get too much into the weeds of how that grant process might be administered. So it's good.
I'm going to move forward so I can go over the rest of the recommendations so you guys have enough time to give us feedback before the end of the evening. Next slide, please, Patty. This is our early learning proposal. And just to remind everyone, as it stands now, this request would be from out of the general fund. There was a little bit of modification for the early learning team the last couple of weeks. We learned that we wouldn't be able to get our IAs fully funded by ESD. They have a funding shift there, which requires us to contribute about $20,000 for each of the 3 IAs that were being proposed. So the ask or the proposal went up about $60,000 or $58,000 to be exact. So this, as a reminder, this includes how to operationalize the early learning center due to open sometime next year, including that IA support, movement of the classrooms in certain cases, and having a secretary and custodial support at the new early learning center, moving the pre-K classroom from the Beaverton early learning center to, and I don't remember what ELC is, somebody help me out there, and moving the early learning center, got it. Movement of the Tualatin elementary classroom to from the Tualatin early learning center to Tualatin elementary. And also a large chunk of this is to convert our high school preschools to actual pre-K centers and hiring licensed teachers for those centers. And then of course, transportation is a big cost request. One thing we've talked about internally too, we're gonna, if we move forward with this, we'll include them back to similar to Corey's question, we'll include this in our budget on an ongoing basis. But next year, we'll have that full amount in the budget, but we may not expend all of it next year because there's still some uncertainty of when the center will actually open because of construction. But like I said, we'll get it in the budget. It'll be in the budget going forward. And, you know, as we go through that monitoring and evaluation process, of course, consider any shifts or enhancements or maintaining at that point. Next slide, please, Patty. So Carol led into this earlier, but I just wanted to summarize it too on one slide here. You're gonna see when you fill out the survey this evening, as far as feedback on the SIA and these other proposals, the SIA activities budget worksheet's been updated to reflect these shifts. So you'll see things highlighted in yellow, but I'm just going to go over them real quick here. Carol's suggestion or request to take the dollars in the SIA that are currently dedicated for that mental health social worker, that's a 1 licensed FTE, and shifting that to the health and wellness coordinator. And then we have the 200,000 for extracurricular, broken down by the 100,000 for pay to play for those underserved or marginalized students, and then another 100,000 for the performing arts and club fund. And then I have a different way of presenting the increasing the priority for our assistant principals. As Carol said, those are currently in priority 4. For next year, for sure, we want to prioritize 3 buildings for assistant principals. Currently, we have 2 deans at Bridgeport and Metzger. Those are our 2 two-way immersion schools. The thought is we would make those positions assistant principals and then move the deans out to other elementary schools needing that support. And in addition, hire an assistant principal at Templeton because we have the principal there will be helping support the Early Learning Center, part of the same campus. And so in this scenario, we would have 5 of our elementary schools in coverage of additional support. And we would continue looking at ways to get to at least our coverage for all 7 Title I schools, if not all 10 elementary. And then to the shift, in the other part of the shift is right now we're identifying a similar cost in SIA to shift out to ESSER, and you'll see in the scenario within the budget activity sheet, what I've highlighted is the PD that's in priority 2. One thought process is to shift that to ESSER to capture these dollars to pay for additional assistant principals.
And Director Moore, when we get to the activity slide, I'll do just a quick orientation to the feedback form so folks can also potentially ask questions, and we'll note the opportunities for clarification at that time as well.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide then, Patty. I'll turn it over to you, Xenia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So in the chat box, you'll see the form as well as the presentation again, if you wanted to take a look. And in your copy, you'll see your feedback, and I'll actually share my screen real quick. That you'll see when you click, you'll see this, and it's in red. You can click that, and then that'll open up your your survey form, your budget form. So just a reminder, we went through a whole process the last few sessions. We started off with your first thoughts. And so you have something similar to that, but at this point, because we will be documenting it, we also want to hear some further feedback. Just as Dr. Sue had highlighted previously, you use your equity lens as well as the art of community. So you had an opportunity to talk with other folks on the budget work group to elaborate on ideas, get different perspectives, and now you have the opportunity to offer some second thoughts related to what students have proposed and what you've heard tonight. Just a reminder, SIA, Student Investment Account, is focused on very specific criteria, and so you'll see that here. That's there for a reminder. Can I get a thumbs up that you can see my screen and I'm talking to something that you can also see? Okay, perfect. And then the next part would be each of the priority lists is listed here as a reminder. Priority 1 didn't have any adjustments, but we still want to have your feedback. And then you there's a follow-up question that asks that if you marked a 1 or a 2, it's optional for you to share your feedback related to that, but we really do want to hear why you abstained from voting, or if you have a serious disagreement, so that we can understand that as we bring that forth to cabinet and the next steps of decision making. And then priority 2 here, this is the list that Director Moore had highlighted. So adjusting the mental health social worker to the health and wellness coordinator, as well as the shift to elementary AP and the adjustment in the licensed classified collaboration time and classified collaboration time, as noted here. And then you'll make your adjustments and your votes here and offer that. And that's how that will look across this exercise related to SIA. And then you'll go to the next section, which will take you to the questions about individual feedback and investments. So for the extracurricular proposal, you have the student's proposal, and then you offer your ratings, whether you are in full support or you're in serious disagreement, and then you offer your feedback there, very similar to that. You'll be asked to give your feedback on early learning proposal. There is a document there that you can also reference. And then that'll be the exercise. You'll have, I think, 20 minutes to take a look at that. And if we can, we are looking at an opportunity for you to go into your breakout groups again, to talk to somebody about questions that you might have. It'll be the same host that you had before. You can choose to go in there, or you can opt not to. So that's an option for you. Any questions? All right, so I'll open up the rooms and, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Corey has his hand up. So
sorry, Corey.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know if I should wait for the room, but I noticed the extracurricular pay to play is half of what they asked for. Will I get clarification on what the half of the offering would be in the breakout room, or is?
Yeah, you can ask those questions. I think I just shrank it so it might look like it's half, but it's all 3 slides on the picture. But yeah, go into the breakout room and then somebody can help answer that.
So as one of the hosts in the breakout room, I'm not sure I could answer that. And if I could restate Corey's question.
Oh, sure.
David, it looks like you might be able to answer.
Yeah, I just want to get clarity. I want to get clarity on the actual question and maybe what number you're referring to, Corey.
Yeah, I thought their ask was 400 total. It was 300, 100, 100, if I remember correctly. Although it was 300 something for transportation and 100, but this shows 200. So I was just.
Yeah, so we, the 200 that's on, there's 200 on the SIA for the pay to play and the club and fine arts fund. The rest of it would come out of general fund.
Got it. Thank you.
The other 300 comes out of the general fund, including 200 for pay to play and 100 for transportation.
Oh, got it. You were asking about the SIA portion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Director Bernard, for clarifying that. Any other questions?
Yeah, real quick. I was just wondering if we don't finish by 8 o'clock, how much time do we have to complete this? Does you want it by tonight? Is that what you're thinking? Survey.
Yeah, I think Dr. Sue mentioned at the beginning that we would allow, extended time to give your first thoughts tonight and second thoughts later.
Director Fox, our thinking here is probably give folks a week if they need it, so that the time tonight is really to start thinking, ask any questions necessary, start to dig into the survey. But we want to give people plenty of time to really think. At the same time, being mindful of our timeline relative to developing a first draft of the budget for consideration on May 4th. But I believe a week should hopefully facilitate that. And as part of that week, we'll do a follow-up email to all of you relative to opportunities to also ask specific staff members if you need to as part of that deliberation, so that we'll be available to you to assist with any additional questions you may have. Corey, you've done a great job modeling that tonight. I really appreciate that, because I think it's that level of detail that's going to perhaps help you think your way through the survey.
Right, and again, why we're taking the time for tonight is also for any other questions that come up. We offered the option of like breakout spaces because we know from feedback from some of you that having that conversation in a bigger space might be nerve-wracking. So to be able to hold space in the smaller rooms are available for you as needed. Any other questions? Are we good to go into breakout rooms? And remember, you don't have to if you don't want to.
Zinnia, just to confirm, we're not filling out the survey this evening.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No, this is for budget work group, and we're here to be a part of it. But yep.
Got it.
Thanks for clarifying.
Zinnia, do you want me to put this slide up that says they're in breakout rooms again?
Yes, I think that would be good so that people are not wondering why we're all quiet.
Okay, will do.
Thank you.
Wrong screen.
Hi, I wanted to go into a breakout room, but I wasn't put in one or invited to one.
Okay, I thought I had you, were you, I think you were you in the breakout room before, Vero?
Yeah, I used the very first time when we had the breakout, I was in
Yep.
group number 1, I think.
Okay, perfect. I'll move you in there. I think, did you log off and log back on?
Yeah, I got booted out actually.
Oh, okay. So I think that might be it. So I'll move you back to that room.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I just sent you the invite. Oh, there you go. Patty, you can move us to the second to closing slide. Thank you. Okay, I think we're all back. Dr. Sue, is this you or is this Director Moore?
This is me.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. So we just wanted to go over next steps as we move forward with our budget process. So of course, this is the last evening of this group meeting together. However, as we mentioned, we want to make sure we get ample feedback from you, both related to the recommendations and the overall process. So there'll be a follow-up survey, and I think we'll be leaning on Director Rose to help with that. And then also there's a small group within the district that's willing to have open office hours for if you want to ask your questions or share feedback, on a smaller group basis. So more to come on that, but that's what we're thinking. Typically, we have a budget listening session following this process, which is open to the general public, and we give an update of where we're at with our budget going into the next year. Tentatively, we have that on the books for May 4th. And in between there and thereafter, Sarah and I will be working on drafting and publishing the proposed budget, which will be put in front of the Budget Committee on May 19th. The Budget Committee will consider the budget for approval. And typically we do so much upfront work and involve the Budget Committee that we do one meeting, but that's to the discretion of the committee. They can have multiple meetings if they wish in order to approve the budget. And then the end part of the process is June 28th, where the board hosts a budget hearing on the front end of the board meeting that allows for public comment. Actually, both the May 19th meeting for the Budget Committee and the budget hearing provide for public comment opportunities related to the budget. And then the board would consider the budget for adoption on the 28th. So plenty of opportunities for all of you to still be involved. With that, I think Dr. Sue's going to do a quick closing for us.
Thank you so much, Director Moore. So we have come to the end of our evening. Just in point of clarity, the survey that we've given you this evening, please know that you have the next week to consider and think, avail yourself to our small group of experts within the district who can answer any questions or receive additional feedback. And then you will also receive an additional survey from Director Tracy Rose relative to the process and any other final thoughts that you may have, because that input is valuable to us. I wish to say offer nothing but gratitude for each and every one of you for being with us again this year. Though Zoom conditions were less than conducive to conversation, as we said this evening, you have been amazingly persistent and resilient through it all. And we are very grateful because your input is important to us. I absolutely look forward to an in-person process next year with great delight. This has been a trial by fire, I think, for all of us this year. But again, we valued the input and we value this process. This is what helps us make the very best decisions we can with the resources that we have, and helps us to steward those resources to where our students receive the greatest response from them. So with that, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you, and wish you all a wonderful evening. Have a good evening.